Thomas sat alone on his old wooden porch chair, watching the golden hues of the setting sun stretch across the quiet street. The wind rustled through the trees, carrying with it the distant sound of laughter from children playing down the road. It was a beautiful evening, the kind his wife used to love. But now, the house was quiet. Too quiet. At 70 years old, Thomas had lived a full life, or at least that's what people told him. He had worked hard, built a family, done all the things a man was supposed to do. Yet now, in this stage of life, he felt like he was merely existing rather than truly living. Ever since his wife passed, the days had started blending into one another. Mornings felt heavy, afternoons stretched on endlessly, and nights were restless. He would wake up, drink his coffee, sit in the same chair, watch the same news, eat the same meals. It was as if time had lost its meaning. Is this all that's left? He wondered. One crisp autumn afternoon, Thomas found himself walking through the park. He wasn't sure why he had gone there. Maybe to escape the silence of his home, or maybe because some part of him was searching for something he couldn't quite name. The air smelled of fallen leaves and distant bonfires, and the sky was painted in warm orange hues. Just as he was about to leave, his eyes landed on an elderly man sitting on a wooden bench, reading a book with a quiet smile on his face. The man's posture was relaxed, his expression peaceful, the kind of peace that Thomas hadn't felt in years. There was something about him. For a moment, Thomas hesitated, but then, as if drawn by an unseen force, he walked over and sat down on the other end of the bench. The man looked up and smiled. Beautiful day, isn't it? Thomas nodded, but something in his face must have given away the weight he was carrying. The man studied him for a moment before speaking again. Have you ever woken up in the morning and felt like you had no reason to get out of bed? The question hit Thomas straight in the heart. He swallowed hard, his fingers tightening slightly on his knee. How many mornings had he opened his eyes only to feel like there was nothing waiting for him? No plans, no excitement, no sense of purpose, just another day, the same as the last. The man must have seen something in his expression because he smiled gently and extended his hand. I'm Samuel. I used to feel that way too. There was something comforting in the way he said it. No pity, no judgment, just quiet understanding. Thomas shook his hand, feeling an unexpected warmth in the gesture. For the first time in a long while, he felt truly seen. And just like that, his journey began. A journey not to change his life, but to change the way he saw it. Before we continue, take a moment to follow this channel. If you're looking for peace, wisdom, and inspiration to live a more meaningful life, you're in the right place. Together, we'll explore simple habits that can transform the way you experience each day. Lesson 1. Start each day with gratitude. The gift of a new morning. The next morning, Thomas woke up before the sun. The house was still dark, the air crisp with the lingering chill of night. He lay there for a moment, staring at the ceiling, his mind already slipping into the familiar cycle of thoughts. The loneliness, the weight of the years, the quiet ache of missing someone who would never return. His first instinct was to pull the covers over his head and drift back into sleep, delaying the start of another empty day. But then, Samuel's words from yesterday echoed in his mind. The way you begin your morning shapes the rest of your day. What if, instead of waking up with regret, you started with gratitude? Gratitude. It sounded simple enough. But how could he feel grateful when so much had been taken from him? With a sigh, Thomas forced himself to sit up. The house was silent, except for the faint ticking of the old clock in the hallway. He turned to the window, where the first rays of sunlight were stretching across the sky, painting it in soft pinks and golds. For a moment, he just watched. And then, almost reluctantly, he whispered to himself, I am grateful for this sunrise. It felt strange, almost forced. But he tried again. I am grateful for this warm bed, His hands brushed against the fabric of his blanket, suddenly aware of its comfort. I am grateful for another day. A lump formed in his throat. Another day. Another chance. Somewhere deep inside, something shifted. Subtle, but real. He wasn't suddenly free from loneliness, nor did his grief vanish in an instant. But for the first time in a long time, he felt a flicker of something different, something lighter. That afternoon, when he met Samuel at the park, he told him about his morning practice. Samuel smiled. Gratitude isn't about pretending everything is perfect. It's about choosing to see what's still beautiful, even in the midst of loss. Thomas nodded, his heart a little lighter than the day before. Tomorrow morning, before you check your phone, before the worries of the day take hold, pause. Find 3 small things to be grateful for. See how it changes the way your day unfolds. Lesson 2. Practice daily mindfulness. Savoring the present moment. The coffee in Thomas's cup had gone cold. He hadn't noticed. He had been sitting at his kitchen table, staring at the clock, lost in thought. His mind had wandered, again, retracing old memories, rehearsing old regrets, worrying about things beyond his control. It had become a habit, living in the past, dreading the future, missing the present entirely. That afternoon, as he sat with Samuel on their usual park bench, he sighed. It's strange, Thomas admitted. I wake up trying to be grateful, but by the time I sit down for breakfast, my mind has already drifted somewhere else. Samuel chuckled. That's because you're living everywhere except where you are. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small orange. Here, eat this. Thomas frowned but took the fruit. He peeled it slowly, feeling the texture of the rind, the way the citrusy scent filled the air. He separated a slice, placed it on his tongue, and for the first time in a long time, he truly tasted something. The sweetness, the juiciness, the way it burst with flavor. He looked at Samuel in surprise. Samuel smiled. That's mindfulness. Thomas blinked. Just paying attention? Not just paying attention. Samuel corrected. Being fully present. Feeling the warmth of the sun on your skin. Noticing the way the wind moves through the trees. Truly tasting your food instead of eating in a rush. It's about experiencing life while it's happening. Not before. Not after. But right now. That evening, Thomas tried something new. He turned off the television. He sat with his cup of tea, holding it in both hands, feeling the warmth seep into his fingers. He took a sip and let the taste settle on his tongue. And for the first time in a long time, he wasn't somewhere else. He was here, in this moment. And for now, that was enough. What if today, instead of rushing through your routine, you slow down? Notice the simple things. Taste your food. Feel the air in your lungs. Let yourself be present for your life. Because this moment is the only one guaranteed to you. Lesson 3. Spend time in silence. The wisdom in stillness. The noise had become a part of Thomas's life. Not loud, chaotic noise, but a constant hum. The television always on. The radio playing in the background. The endless scrolling through news and headlines. It was as if silence had become something to be avoided, something uncomfortable. That afternoon, as he and Samuel walked along the lake, the older man suddenly stopped. Listen, he said. Thomas furrowed his brows. To what? Samuel smiled. Exactly. For the first time, Thomas noticed it. The quiet. The world wasn't completely silent, but there was a softness to it. The rustling of leaves. The distant call of a bird. The gentle ripple of the water as it lapped against the shore. Samuel gestured to the lake. Look at the water. When the wind is strong, when the surface is disturbed, you can't see your reflection clearly, right? Thomas nodded. Samuel continued. The mind is the same way. When it's full of distractions, full of noise, You can't see things clearly, but when the water is still, you can see your reflection. Thomas finished, the realization sinking in. That evening, instead of turning on the television, Thomas sat on his porch in silence. At first, it felt strange, almost unnatural. His mind raced, filling the quiet with thoughts about the past, worries about the future. But then, as he simply sat and listened, something changed. He heard the wind moving through the trees. He noticed the rhythm of his own breath. And slowly, the stillness didn't feel empty anymore. It felt full. We spend so much of our lives surrounded by noise, afraid of silence. But in stillness, we find clarity. Try it today. Turn off the distractions. Sit quietly and just listen. You might be surprised by what you hear. Lesson 4. Cultivate compassion. The ripple effect of kindness. It had been years since Thomas truly looked a stranger in the eye. Not because he was unkind, but because life had made him withdrawn. He moved through his days quietly, keeping to himself, expecting little from others, and offering just the same in return. The world felt distant, and he let it stay that way. One morning, as he walked through the neighborhood, he saw an elderly woman struggling with her grocery bags. For a moment, he hesitated. Should he help? Or should he just keep walking, as he always did? Before he could decide, Samuel's voice echoed in his mind. Compassion isn't just about what we feel. It's about what we do. Something in Thomas shifted. Without another thought, he walked up to the woman and gently took one of the heavy bags from her hands. Let me help you, he said, offering a small but genuine smile. The woman looked startled at first, then grateful. As they walked together to her doorstep, she told him about her late husband, about how she used to have someone to carry the bags for her, about how much she missed the simple feeling of being cared for. Thomas felt his chest tighten. He knew that feeling well. When they reached her home, she touched his arm lightly. You have no idea how much this means to me, she whispered. As Thomas walked away, something inside him felt lighter. He had given so little, a few minutes of his time, a small act of kindness, yet it had mattered. That afternoon, he told Samuel about what had happened. The old man nodded knowingly. Kindness is like dropping a stone into a pond, Samuel said. Even the smallest act sends ripples farther than we can see. That night, as Thomas sat alone in his house, he realized it didn't feel as empty. Because for the first time in a long time, he felt connected to the world again. Compassion isn't just a feeling. It's an action. A small kindness. A gentle word. A moment of patience. Try it today. You never know how far the ripples will reach. Lesson 5. Journal for emotional balance. Writing to heal the heart. Thomas sat at his kitchen table, staring at a blank page. The pen in his hand felt unfamiliar, almost heavy. He hadn't written anything by hand in years. Not since the days when he and his wife would leave each other little notes on the fridge. Back then, words had felt warm. Now, they felt like ghosts. Samuel had given him the notebook earlier that day. Write something down every night. He had said, not for anyone else, just for you. Thomas had scoffed at the idea. What was the point? What could possibly change just by putting words on a page? But now, sitting alone in the quiet of his home, something inside him whispered, just try. He hesitated, then put the pen to paper. At first, the words came slow, unsure. Today was a good day. I helped a woman carry her groceries. She reminded me of my wife. He paused, the memory settling in his chest like a soft weight. I miss her. Some days the house feels too quiet. But today, for a moment, it felt full again. A deep breath. Then another sentence. Maybe tomorrow will feel the same. He looked at the words. Simple. Honest. His own. Something shifted inside him. Small, but real. It was as if, in writing the words down, he had taken the tangled mess of thoughts in his mind and laid them out neatly before him. They weren't as heavy now. The next morning, when he saw Samuel, he said quietly, "I wrote something last night." Samuel smiled. "And how did it feel?" Thomas thought for a moment. "Like I could finally hear myself again." Sometimes, the thoughts in our minds feel too big to carry alone. But when we write them down, we begin to understand them. Tonight, take 5 minutes. Write anything. What you felt. What you saw. What made you smile. Let your own words guide you back to yourself. Lesson 6. Meditate daily, finding peace within. Thomas had never been one for sitting still. His whole life he had been in motion, working, providing, fixing things around the house. Even after retirement, his mind never truly rested. If he wasn't worrying about something, he was remembering something. So when Samuel suggested meditation, Thomas scoffed. "You want me to sit there and do nothing?" Samuel chuckled. "Not nothing, just be." Still, Thomas resisted. He had tried once before, years ago, but his thoughts had been loud, restless. He figured meditation wasn't for people like him. But that night, as he lay awake in bed, his mind racing from one thought to the next, he sighed. "What do I have to lose?" He sat up, placed his feet on the floor, and closed his eyes. At first, all he heard was noise. The ticking of the clock, the hum of the refrigerator, his own thoughts tumbling over each other. Did I lock the door? What am I doing tomorrow? Will I always feel this lonely? Then Samuel's voice echoed in his memory. "Breathe, Thomas. Just focus on your breath." So he did. He inhaled slowly. He exhaled even slower. For the first few minutes, his mind fought him. It kept pulling him back into thoughts of the past, worries about the future. But every time it did, he gently returned to his breath. In, out, tick, tock. Somewhere in that stillness, something shifted. The thoughts didn't disappear, but they lost their grip. The silence that had once felt empty now felt peaceful, like the surface of a lake finally settling after a long storm. The next morning, when he met Samuel at the park, Thomas admitted, "I tried meditating last night." Samuel smiled. And Thomas took a deep breath. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was chasing my own thoughts. I just let them pass. Samuel nodded. That's the beginning of peace. Meditation isn't about stopping your thoughts. It's about learning to sit with them without getting lost in them. Tonight, take just 5 minutes. Breathe. Let the mind wander, then gently bring it back. Over time, the storm will quiet. And in that stillness, you may just find yourself. Lesson 7. Practice self-discipline. The strength in showing up. Thomas had always thought of discipline as something harsh. Strict rules, rigid schedules, an exhausting battle against himself. But now, at 70, discipline looked different. It wasn't about proving anything to anyone. It wasn't about forcing himself into routines he didn't enjoy. It was about showing up for himself, even when no one was watching. One chilly morning, Thomas sat at his kitchen table, staring at his walking shoes by the door. He had told himself he would go for a short walk every morning. Nothing extreme, just a quiet stroll through the park to stretch his legs and clear his mind. But today, he didn't feel like it. The warmth of the house was comforting. The thought of bundling up, of stepping out into the brisk air, felt like too much effort. He sighed, reaching for his coffee instead. I can skip today, he thought. What difference does one day make? Then he heard Samuel's voice in his head. Discipline isn't about feeling motivated. It's about keeping a promise to yourself. Thomas frowned. A promise. Slowly, he stood up. He put on his shoes. He opened the door. The cold air bit at his skin. But as he took his first steps down the street, something inside him shifted. His body awakened. His breath deepened. His thoughts became clearer. By the time he reached the park, he had forgotten why he had resisted in the first place. That afternoon, when he saw Samuel, he said, "I almost skipped my walk today." Samuel nodded. "But you didn't." Thomas smirked. "No, I didn't." Samuel's eyes twinkled. "And how do you feel now?" Thomas took a deep breath, feeling the crisp air fill his lungs. He smiled. Stronger. Self-discipline isn't about perfection. It's about keeping the small promises you make to yourself. It's not about pushing through exhaustion. It's about showing up, even in small ways. Today, take one step forward. Even if you don't feel like it, future you will be grateful. Lesson 8. Learn something new. Every day, curiosity keeps the soul alive. Thomas never thought of himself as someone who needed to keep learning. He had worked hard his whole life, raised a family, paid his dues. What more was there to know? But one afternoon, as he and Samuel sat in the park, they passed by a group of children gathered around an old man sketching on a notepad. The man's hands were steady, his strokes deliberate. The picture, a simple, peaceful landscape, began to take form. Thomas watched, fascinated. "Did you always know how to draw?" one of the children asked. The old man chuckled. "No," he said. "I picked it up when I was 75. Thomas's eyes widened. 75! The man nodded. "I figured, as long as I'm still breathing, I might as well keep learning." That evening, Thomas couldn't shake those words. He thought about all the things he had once wanted to try. Playing the piano, learning a new language, even baking, bread like his wife used to. But he had always told himself it was too late. Why start now? The next morning, he walked to the library and borrowed a beginner's book on sketching. He sat by the window with a pencil in hand and made his first, clumsy attempt. It wasn't perfect. Far from it. But it was new. And for the first time in years, he felt his mind wake up in a way it hadn't in a long time. That afternoon, he told Samuel about his new endeavor. Samuel grinned. Good. A mind that keeps learning is a mind that stays young. Thomas chuckled. You think I'll be any good? Samuel shrugged. Does it matter? And Thomas realized it didn't. Because it wasn't about being good. It was about being curious. Being alive. No matter how old you are, no matter what stage of life you're in, there is always something new to learn. Try something today. Pick up a book, ask a question, explore a skill. Keep your mind open and life will always feel fresh. Lesson 9. Set daily intentions. A life with purpose. Thomas had spent most of his life reacting to the day instead of shaping it. He woke up, went through the motions, let the hours unfold however they wanted. One day blended into the next, until the years had slipped by unnoticed. But one morning, as he sat with Samuel on their usual park bench, his friend handed him a small notepad. Write down your intention for today, Samuel said. Thomas frowned. My what? Your intention? Samuel repeated. One thing. Just one. That you want to focus on today. It could be patience, kindness, gratitude. It doesn't have to be grand. Just something that will guide you. Thomas hesitated, then scribbled something down. Today, I will listen more than I speak. It seemed simple, almost insignificant. But as the day unfolded, he found himself remembering it. Pausing before interrupting, truly hearing the words of the barista at the cafe, noticing the tone in his daughter's voice when she called that evening. By nightfall, something had shifted. The day had felt more intentional, more meaningful. The next morning, He wrote another. Today, I will find something beautiful in the ordinary. And so, he did. He noticed the way sunlight streamed through his window, how the laughter of a child in the distance reminded him of his own youth. For the first time in a long time, his days no longer felt aimless. That afternoon, he looked at Samuel and said, I used to think purpose was about having big goals, but maybe it's just about how we choose to live each day. Samuel smiled. Exactly. Each morning, before the world pulls you in 1,000 directions, take a moment. Set an intention for the day. It doesn't have to be big. It just has to be yours. A small shift in focus can lead to a lifetime of purpose. Lesson 10. End your day with reflection. Finding meaning in the moments. The house was quiet again. Thomas sat by his bedroom window, a cup of tea warming his hands, the moon casting a silver glow over the street below. Another day had passed. For most of his life, he never really thought about the way a day ended. The nights had always been routine. Watching television until he dozed off, lying awake with thoughts running in circles, then waking up the next morning only to repeat the same cycle. But now, he did something different. He opened the small notebook Samuel had given him and read the words from the night before. Today, I will listen more than I speak. A soft smile crossed his face as he remembered the barista's story about her grandmother, the way his daughter had sighed in relief when he simply listened instead of offering advice. Had it really only been a small intention that made such a difference? He picked up his pen and wrote, What went well today? I took my walk, even when I didn't feel like it. I noticed how beautiful the sky looked just before sunset. I laughed at something silly, and it felt good. What could I have done differently? I could have been more patient with myself. He paused, staring at the words. In the past, he would have been quick to judge himself, to dwell on regrets. But tonight, there was no self-criticism, just awareness. Samuel had told him, once, reflection isn't about keeping score. It's about learning to see your life clearly. And now, as he closed the notebook, Thomas realized his life wasn't empty. It was full of moments, full of small victories, full of things he might have missed if he hadn't taken the time to look. Before you sleep tonight, pause, reflect. What made you smile today? What lesson did today bring? Write it down, even if it's just a sentence. The smallest moments, when noticed, can add up to a life well lived. The journey back to yourself. A year had passed since that first conversation on the park bench. Thomas was still the same man in many ways. Still 70, still waking up in the same small house, still walking the same streets. But something within him had shifted. He no longer rushed through his mornings, lost in thoughts of the past. Instead, he woke with gratitude, letting the first rays of sunlight remind him that each day was a gift. He no longer ate his meals absent-mindedly, or let his mind wander in 100 directions. Now, he noticed the taste of his coffee, the sound of the wind through the trees, the way laughter felt in his chest. And the silence no longer felt lonely. It felt like home. One evening, as he sat on his porch watching the sunset, Samuel joined him. The two sat in comfortable silence for a while, until Samuel finally spoke. So, what have you learned this past year? Thomas exhaled slowly, his gaze steady on the horizon. That life isn't about waiting for something big to change. It's about the small things. The way you wake up, the way you listen, the way you choose to see the world. Samuel smiled. And do you feel different? Thomas thought for a moment, then nodded. Not different. More present. Like I'm finally here, instead of somewhere else. Samuel placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. That's all life ever asked of you. For so many years, Thomas had thought happiness was something distant, something that lived in memories of the past or hopes for the future. But now he understood. Happiness had always been here, in the simple moments he had overlooked, in the quiet of a sunrise, in the kindness of a stranger, in the taste of a warm meal, in the peace of stillness. His life hadn't become extraordinary. It had become intentional, and that made all the difference. This isn't just Thomas's story. It's all of ours. We wait for life to change, not realizing that peace isn't found in a different future. It's found in how we choose to live today. The smallest habits, practiced daily, can bring the greatest transformation. So, take a breath. Start small. Tomorrow morning, when you wake up, pause. Find something to be grateful for. Taste your first sip of coffee. Step outside and listen. Set a quiet intention. And most of all, be here for this day, this moment, this life. If this journey resonated with you, support this channel by following and sharing. Together, we can continue to explore the wisdom that leads to a life of presence, peace, and purpose.